On Thursday, the U.S. Food and Drug Administration finally announced its proposed restrictions on vaping products in the agency's effort to combat what it calls an epidemic of teen vaping. According to just released 2018 data, vaping increased nearly 80% among high schoolers and 50% among middle schoolers, the vast majority of that usage driven by the popularity of JUUL. As expected, FDA announced it would be restricting the sale of vaping products to only menthol, mint, and tobacco flavors at convenience store and gas stations across the country. This is the JUUL Rule: no more mango and melon flavors at your favorite corner store. Joining us today to discuss FDA's regulatory action is Dr. Michael Siegel from Boston University School of Public Health. Dr. Siegel, thanks for joining us again on RegWatch.
Thanks for inviting me.
Well, first off, how would you characterize FDA's regulatory action against vaping?
Well, I would characterize this as a really grossly disproportionate action in terms of the way the agency is dealing with electronic cigarettes compared to the way that they're dealing with regular tobacco cigarettes. Tobacco cigarettes have been addicting young people for years, for decades, and the FDA never jumped into action to take those off the shelves. Now the FDA is taking most electronic cigarettes off the retail shelf, but it's leaving the real cigarettes on the shelf so that youth can continue to buy those products. It doesn't make sense to me. I think that there is something wrong with the overall perspective of the agency when they are, doing everything they can, taking really drastic action to take e-cigarettes off the shelf and make those unavailable, yet cigarettes can just continue to be sold in these stores unencumbered.
So let's make sure that our audience knows the difference between the closed systems and the open systems, because we're really talking about the closed system devices here at the 10,000 locations that are convenience and gas, the ubiquity that you have with those kinds of retail locations, whereas the tank refillable systems that are primarily sold at vape retailer were singled out as not actually having any action at all. And it was a bit of an endorsement for open systems because they almost said open system retailers are responsible, yet convenience store and gas station are not.
The idea, at least in theory, is that if you restrict the sale of vaping products to adult-only establishments, that they'll be less accessible to youth. But I would argue that if that's true, let's just stipulate that that's true. Well, if that's true, then why is that not true for cigarettes too? And why should cigarettes be allowed to be sold at these retail establishments? It doesn't make any sense to me to restrict. Essentially what they're saying is we will go take any step necessary to make sure that kids do not have access to fake cigarettes, but we're not going to do anything. It doesn't concern us that kids have access to real cigarettes. And that, given the difference in the health effects of the two, to me that makes no sense.
So in a way, this regulatory action then may be saying to the public that you can trust a clerk at a 7-Eleven to sell deadly cigarettes, but you can't trust that clerk to sell fake cigarettes like e-cigarettes.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, that's exactly what this is saying. So if the FDA is really serious and their philosophy is we cannot allow youth to become addicted to nicotine, and we have to get rid of any product that is addicting you, then the first thing they should be doing is to restrict the sale of cigarettes at these places. It doesn't make any sense to say, we're going to allow cigarettes to be sold, but not electronic cigarettes, because it basically normalizes tobacco use. It basically says that, tobacco use is fine. It's a familiar, although deadly behavior, and so we're going to allow it. But this new thing, we just can't accept. So I think that's a bad message. But I think there's a second harm here, and that is probably the most tangible one, which is I think a lot of ex-smokers who quit using electronic cigarettes and are dependent on these retail outlets for their products are going to just give up and return to smoking, because if it's not as easy for them to get their products, they're just going to say, I might as well just smoke rather than have to go through all these hurdles to get the products that I want.
And that's really part of the issue here, isn't it? Because the success of JUUL, it comes from, part of it is that it's ubiquitous. So the actual locations and the ubiquity of it, is that not almost one of the most important things if you're trying to get all of these hardened smokers to finally give vaping a shot?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you look at the market share data, consistently, the brands which have done the best are the ones which are sold in retail outlets. It's just, undeniable. They may be able to go to a vape shop or they may be able to get them online, but that's, it takes a lot of effort, especially if there's not a vape shop in their community. And so most likely what a lot of these ex-smokers are going to do is say, forget it. It's just not worth it. I'll just go into the retail store that I usually go to, and instead of getting my electronic cigarette, I'll just get the real thing. And that would have devastating, and is going to have devastating impacts on the public's health.
Could you actually say that it could actually not even just harm, but actually lead to somebody's death?
Well, absolutely. Because if somebody who is a ex-smoker, they've quit, they've done, tremendous service to their health, and if they now go back to smoking, it's very plausible that they could develop disease and even death in a way that wouldn't have happened if they had continued to vape and stay off cigarettes. So yeah, I think this is, to put it bluntly, this is going to cost lives.
In your time working in this space, have you ever heard an FDA commissioner using such breathless language that this one is using, describing a threat?
I don't think that health authorities describing this degree of a threat for a product that, when compared to another product that's on the market, poses a much, much greater threat. I think that's the part that I haven't heard. I mean, we've heard often there is hysteria about there are scares about various dangers, perceived health risks out there. But this is kind of a really strange one because of the contrast between the harms that tobacco cigarettes are causing and the harms that e-cigarettes are causing. And, just to be very clear on the science, we know that cigarettes are causing more than 400,000 deaths each year. To the best of our knowledge, certainly to the best of my knowledge, there are no deaths that have been ever associated with vaping. Now, I'm not saying that vaping is safe, and I'm not saying that 20 or 30 years down the road, there may be data showing that chronic vaping over a lifetime could lead to some chronic disease. But we know that even short-term use of cigarettes causes severe and substantial health effects. We don't know that in fact, we know that's not true for vaping.
Why is that message not getting out to the public then?
I think it's because health groups have really not been honest with the public, including the FDA. I mean, from the very beginning, when the FDA first took on this issue in 2009, they really scared the public, and that hysteria has kind of continued. And even to this day, I hear health organizations all the time warning about the risks of, for example, popcorn lung. There has never been a case, and there's never been a confirmed case of popcorn lung among any vapor anywhere in the world, despite the millions and millions of people who are vaping. And now we have at least 9 full years of experience with the product. So where is this great risk of popcorn lung? And if it's so great, why has there never been a reported case? The health community has done a great job of scaring people about a risk that is absolutely non-existent. And so I think it's that misinformation that's really led or contributed to the sense, to what I would call a kind of skewed sense of perspective here. We've really lost our perspective.
Dr. Siegal, I've got here a list of statements made by opposite opponents to vaping. So this is, pulled directly out of Real Cost Campaign, out of the Truth Initiative, and Truth Orange, and the puppets, and everything else. So let me throw these statements at you, and then you give a quick response, and let's try to rapid fire. Okay, first one: nicotine harms developing brains.
I would say that is true, but it could be misleading depending on the context.
Nicotine can permanently damage the teen brain.
I don't think there's strong evidence to support that statement.
Nicotine is as addictive as heroin and cocaine.
I think it depends on the delivery mechanism. Possibly true for smoking, but absolutely not true for vaping.
Vaping nicotine can damage your blood vessels.
I think that probably is accurate.
Vaping weakens your immune system.
There is experimental evidence for that, but in the clinical real life setting, I haven't seen evidence for that yet.
Vaping can cause irreversible lung damage.
That is there's absolutely no evidence for that one.
How do they get away with that?
I don't know. I mean, they didn't let the tobacco industry get away with it, but for some reason, when it's coming from the health community, it's okay to mislead.
The next one, e-cigarettes contain lead that can cause brain damage.
Some e-cigarettes contain lead, and lead can cause brain damage, but I think putting them together, there's no evidence that vaping can cause brain damage.
E-cigarettes contain antifreeze and formaldehyde, embalming fluid.
So very misleading. I mean, there are some brands of e-cigarettes, when you heat them too high, there may be some formaldehyde, but suggesting that they contain antifreeze is grossly misleading.
And then the last one, you're 4 times more likely to start smoking cigarettes if you vape.
Well, that is just false. And we have data that we've looked at, which I think completely disproves that statement.
And you heard a lot in FDA's announcement today and lately that it's a given fact now that, in the last year, I can't recall what the research was from, but it's a fact now that teens who try e-cigarettes, even a couple times, are more likely to smoke cigarettes. And that's in every story. It's all over the airwaves right now.
Well, I think the problem with that is that I don't think that's the real question. I don't think we care about whether a kid who tries an e-cigarette is more likely to try a cigarette. Of course they are. I mean, a kid who tries a cigarette is also more likely to try alcohol. They're more likely to try heroin, for that matter. We know that kids who try one risky behavior are more likely to do another risky behavior. That's not the relevant question. The relevant question is, does vaping cause kids to eventually transition to smoking? In other words, do kids who become addicted to a product like the JUUL eventually transition to smoking? And frankly, to be very clear, I don't want anyone to come away from this and misinterpret what I'm saying as to think that I'm saying that the problem of JUUL use isn't an issue at all. It is. I mean, I'm very concerned. I'm extremely concerned about the fact that that JUUL has taken off and has become endemic in our high schools and to some extent in middle schools, and that youth really are becoming addicted to the JUUL in a way that we didn't see with any other type of e-cigarette. And that's because of the high potential addictive nature of JUUL, because of the fact that it uses a nicotine salt instead of just the usual nicotine formulation. So yeah, that's very concerning. But the reason it's concerning is because of the possibility that these kids will be addicted long term, and that eventually at some point they may transition to cigarettes. That's the real scare here. But the evidence right now suggests that this doesn't take place. Very few kids, from what we can tell from all the national surveys that have been done, including the PATH survey, very few kids who have not used tobacco before start vaping and then become addicted to vaping and then subsequently transition to smoking.
Dr. Siegal, what do you think is the real problem here? Does it boil down to JUUL, or is there other things that FDA should be looking at?
I think the way I would describe the story is that there has simply been an explosion of JUUL use. I mean, JUUL has become a
phenomenon.
A phenomenon among high school students. I mean, it's the new thing, And so I think that the reaction needs to be specific to that. I think the danger here is not e-cigarettes in general. It's not vaping in general. The danger here is JUUL, because JUUL is the product that is addictive. There is no evidence that I've seen that any of the other brands of e-cigarettes that are on the market are addictive. And this is why I mean, this is why JUUL became the leader among adults. I mean, it's not just a youth phenomenon. JUUL skyrocketed in terms of its adult market share. And that's because of a scientific reason. The JUUL actually does deliver nicotine in a way that simulates the nicotine delivery of real cigarettes. And so obviously that gives it a competitive advantage for smokers who are trying to quit, because it's closer to the experience that they have with a cigarette. So the way I would describe the problem now is not vaping, it's not e-cigarettes, it's JUUL, it's the JUUL. And so I think that we did need to do something about that. But I think that what's important to recognize is that JUUL voluntarily took their product off retail shelves and in fact went further than they probably had to. And once that's done, once that's accomplished, I don't see why there's a need to ban all the other products from the shelves, which weren't causing addiction in the first place. I think the FDA probably could have just negotiated with JUUL separately and gotten them to take this type of an action. Or even if we just stipulate that JUUL wouldn't have taken this action unless the FDA had actually threatened to issue these regulations. Once JUUL announced that they were taking their product off the shelves, I just don't see why it's still necessary to go through with this.